really know how to review documentaries too well because I just feel like I learned so much, and usually they're pretty well produced, especially on these streaming platforms and stuff. I love an expose. So I just wanted to talk about it, talk about Abercrombie and how I grew up with it in the 2000s, and also make y'all aware of this documentary. Hello and welcome back to the Miscellaneous channel where we do miscellaneous things. I'm Zeleny. I typically cover TV, pop culture, internet trends, and other miscellaneous things on this channel, so subscribe if that's your vibe. Today I wanted to talk about the latest Netflix documentary that has come out, and that is White Hot: The Rise and Fall of Abercrombie and Fitch. I've seen some buzz about it on social media, but not too much. It just came out this past week, and I think a lot of people are getting into it. As of recording this video, it is the #1 movie on Netflix according to their little ranking thing. Let me start off with, is this documentary worth watching? I don't want to say the full name because it is very long. But I say if you like documentaries, if you like exposés, this one is solid. The reviews have been kind of mixed that I've seen, and I felt similarly when I was thinking of it technically, and like it does stay pretty surface level on the timeline of Abercrombie and Fitch as a brand. It covers a lot of the major controversies and scandals, the leadership that allowed it to happen. It interviews former models, former employees, people involved in the lawsuits against them, creative directors, plus also critics that helped bring awareness to their exclusionary practices. I think they covered a lot of the perspectives that were kind of critical and part of the Abercrombie's narrative. At the same time, it is more of an overview timeline rather than like digging really deep into society and how society changed alongside the brand. Like it stays pretty narrowly focused on the brand, while the themes it is exploring is about greater societal shifts. So I don't think the documentary went much outside of just the Abercrombie bubble, but maybe that would have been too much to cover in a movie. So I think it's a solid documentary. I think the graphics are kind of the strong part for me too. They did a good job. There's a lot of nostalgia to it, so if you grew up in the 2000s or earlier, and mall culture was part of your upbringing, then you will find a lot of nostalgia in this movie. Despite it covering a lot of the controversies and scandals, they depict mall culture and how Abercrombie was part of that, and other mall brands that were big, and just how important the mall was for our generation. They add in music from that time, like emo pop songs. It's like a weird nostalgia where I'm nostalgic for it because I was young and, you know, had freedom and little responsibilities and whatnot. But at the same time, it's like a nostalgia for an era that was so exclusionary and awful to people. It probably gave me and my entire generation body image issues. Like, I would not want to go back to those times. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't like the most groundbreaking documentary of all time, but if you're into the nostalgia and are into like expose type of stories, then it's worth a shot. It has a 56% on Rotten Tomatoes and a like 33% audience score. So the reviews are pretty mixed, and I think a lot of like the negative side of it was it was just kind of scratching the surface on the issues they were talking about rather than like going deep and really providing answers of like, why did it rise? Why did it fall? So let me talk a little bit about White Hot: The Rise and Fall of Abercrombie and Fitch. It is a documentary movie on Netflix that released on April 19th of 2022. This documentary was directed by Allison Clayman. Seems to have a lot of women on the team, which is pretty cool, according to Wikipedia. So I read this interview with the director, Allison. I'll link it down below. The reporter was kind of asking her how she is sort of fitting into this big trend lately of these scammer, like fraud CEO documentary trend that we've been seeing the past couple of years. She said she wasn't necessarily influenced by that trend to make this, and she feels that the Abercrombie and Fitch documentary, I keep calling it Fish, the Abercrombie and Fitch documentary feels a little more personal to people because of the way the store and its marketing might have influenced people at like a very impressionable age. She felt that people had a more personal relationship to a store like Abercrombie and Fitch compared to the kind of relationship people have with a company like WeWork or Uber or Theranos, like companies that didn't impact us personally, especially not at like a young age. It's not as a universal of like a personal relationship you might have with the brand, though not everyone shopped at Abercrombie and Fitch. I happen to have, but I don't think everyone I knew was, like, so I do agree a little bit with her that it is more personal to the people that had any kind of interaction with Abercrombie and Fitch. But I do feel like this documentary, whether it meant to or not, falls under this trend of exposés of really shitty companies. I don't think it's a trend of like, oh, just audiences just want to see a bunch of scammer and expose documentaries. I think it's maybe the sign of a decaying society that now it feels like all our media is about scandals and controversy and how something was horrible. I don't know, maybe it's just the nature of documentaries, and the documentaries that do best are the ones exposing something scandalous. It's just kind of a reckoning of our past with this new era of culture that's post-2016, post-2020, of trying to be more inclusionary. A lot of things at play. I don't know if I'm even making any sense, but it got me thinking, and it's an interesting trend. Since we're in the About section, let me read y'all the synopsis. In the late 90s and early aughts, Abercrombie & Fitch was the first stop for many shoppers on their trip to the mall. Shirtless jocks stood guard at the store entrances, selling a potent mix of sex and wholesomeness. Pulsing dance beats and the brand's fierce scent drew in hordes of young people hoping to buy themselves a seat at the cool kids' table. Led by outspoken CEO Mike Jeffries, A&F cashed in on an all-American image and enshrined its clothes as must-haves for the new millennium. But over time, revelations of exclusionary marketing and discriminatory hiring practices began to engulf the white-hot brand in scandal. Featuring interviews with dozens of former employees, executives, and models, the documentary unravels the complex history of the iconic brand that influenced an entire generation. So I do think the movie is a bit myopic, bringing out the big word. I don't even know if I used that right, but it feels kind of narrowly focused on Abercrombie and Fitch when it was this wider culture of exclusionary marketing, very white and Eurocentric beauty standards for a lot of stores. Like, I don't think it was just Abercrombie and Fitch. I think they were the worst about it because they were the most blatant and they were caught the most times, I guess. I do feel like the synopsis and the documentary in general kind of overplays the influence of Abercrombie a bit, just to, I think, to drive home the point of like how big the rise was to make the fall, more impactful. So I get why the movie would do that. Let me just talk about my thoughts on the movie and the documentary and just this as a whole. More specifically, this is your spoiler alert. Abercrombie and Fitch actually had a very long history. I did not realize that, even though it's kind of obvious now looking at it because a lot of their graphic stuff had the year on it, so they always had like established 1892, and I just never had registered that meant literally like, oh, Abercrombie existed in the 1800s. Who would have thought? In the beginning, they were just a manly man store that sold like cigarettes and books and clothes for men. But then Les Wexner I think that's his name. Les Wexner, the guy that owns all the mall stores, basically, he acquired Abercrombie and Fitch in like the 80s or 90s. But Wexner acquired it and decided to totally rebrand it. He put in Mike Jeffries as CEO, who ended up becoming just the leader that created Abercrombie and Fitch as we know it. He was behind the store design, the choosing of the photos and the photographer he chose, and he was also behind their discriminatory hiring practices where they would literally hire people based on looks and put the best looking people in the very front and hide away people they deemed not good looking enough, and usually minorities out of the very few minorities that already worked there. This became a big deal when a few of those employees that had been discriminated against got together and sued Abercrombie and Fitch for discrimination. My favorite part of the documentary was at the beginning when that was the nostalgia part where they were describing malls, but it was so funny. This is the one like meme I saw going around for this doc. There was this one guy, I don't even remember what he did, if he was just like a former employee or something. He was trying to describe malls, but in a way that was for someone that had like never heard of a mall. He said something like, imagine a search engine you can walk through. I was like, oh my god, I'm officially old. Like, do people not know what a mall is? I don't think that's actually true. I think it was just a little bit like, just over explaining it just in case someone had never heard of a mall watching, but that was just such a funny moment. They also talked about the A&F Quarterly magazine, which was their catalog that they would send out. It had a lot of the editorial team featured in the documentary. Basically, the gist is that the magazine was very homoerotic. In general, a lot of the team was gay men. If you're not aware, the photography of Abercrombie and Fitch on the walls was very sensual, very nude, which again, I had never thought about how like all of their photo shoots were naked and they were selling clothing. It doesn't seem to make sense. In these catalogs, there was a lot of just sensual, like nudity, and that's what gave Abercrombie and Fitch a cool and sexy edge, especially to young people. The clothes were at a kind of high price point. They were definitely not accessible prices. It was like probably like $30 for a simple basic tee or $100 for jeans. I was privileged enough to grow up with a mom who was very into kind of clothing and fashion, and she would treat me when she could to something nice at the mall. Honestly, I come from a long line of shopaholics. Like, we were never rich, but all the money we did have went to the mall. I gotta say it like it is. I remember specifically liking their jeans. I think they had very low-rise jeans, which was the trend back then, and they felt like high quality to me. I don't know if I knew what high quality meant as a 13-year-old. It was definitely more of a treat thing. I don't remember much about that time. That's why I say like this movie in general, because it is the focus of the movie, it does kind of, I think, exaggerate, at least in my experience, the impact of Abercrombie and Fitch. And maybe it's just me, literally just me, that I just kind of viewed it as just clothes, and it just felt like luxury, so it felt like it'd be quality, the jeans would last me a long time. Like, I felt like it was this luxury treat myself thing through my mom. Obviously, I wasn't old enough to have money. I feel like I mostly wanted the clothes because they smelled good, and they sprayed that cologne on them, and I remember the smell, and wearing it the first time was the best because it would still smell, so it's kind of like you had the perfume on. That was the main appeal to me about the clothes, literally just that they sprayed perfume on them. I also never had big impressions about the store itself. Like, yeah, it was like dark and music was loud, and I don't know, I was at the mall so much. Every store to me was just a store. Like, I was comfortable at the mall. It was my playground. I would look around at every store. I didn't care. I would go the back of Spencer's. I was lucky enough to have a lot of freedom with my mom. She didn't freak out if I went into Hot Topic or Zoomies or whatever the emo stores were. I didn't have much big impressions about like the marketing of it or the clothes themselves. Like, I just kind of let myself be influenced by my mom and her taste. So Abercrombie was kind of just another store to me where I would like some of their pieces, and they were just very trendy. They had the flared and low-rise jeans and the little shirts with like a pocket and like a hoodie type pocket with like a hood, but it was just like a long sleeve t-shirt that was very thin. They just kind of had the styles and cuts of clothing that were popular, but so did American Eagle, and I would go there, and so did Aeropostale. I loved Aeropostale because I could get more things because it was cheaper. There were so many little stores too at the mall that would pop up. They were all like trendy stuff, like in the vein of Forever 21. I would loved Wet Seal at the time. Justice for Wet Seal. That was such a fun store. I think I was a little young for the peak of Abercrombie to affect me in the way a lot of the people talked about in the documentary. I wasn't like in the late high school, college age. It was the people in college and late high school that they were targeting for being employees at the store and discriminating against ultimately if they didn't fit their ridiculous standard. But I don't want to discredit like the impacts that that type of marketing has had on people that don't fit that standard, and I definitely don't. At this time, I'm like a pink monster. Like, I'm definitely way far from whatever image that Abercrombie was pushing back then. The marketing in general those days in the 2000s especially, and the 90s too, like, it was very damaging. It was like so thin, and I also blame like Victoria's Secret a lot, which is the same owner. All of these stores had such unrealistic body image standards, and as a 13-year-old, I was skinny enough to fit into Abercrombie jeans, but that didn't last much longer. I was literally a child, so like it's crazy because at the time I did not think I was. I thought I needed to lose weight. I feel like my entire life I have felt I needed to lose weight. That I think is relatable to a lot of people in my generation. Maybe still to this day. Like, I don't think fat phobia is gone. I think it's better, but it's not. Like, who are the most successful artists and celebrities of today that are coming up right now? And it's like so many of them are very thin still, or they have like huge asses but tiny waist, like the Kardashian style. I think the Kardashians kind of provided the template for like the new in trend body style, which is almost just as inaccessible as the rail thin 90s and 2000s like Paris Hilton body style that was popular then. So it just feels like we went from one unrealistic beauty standard to another unrealistic beauty standard. It's like we can't win, and that's the point of a lot of these places. They're trying to sell you this fantasy. And there was a quote in the movie that said exclusion is part of society or something like that, and I think that's true. And we still see it today, though it is better. And my mom actually watched this movie, and she called me and was like, I'm sad I didn't grow up in today's times, because it's just so much less about being super skinny now. I was shocked to hear my mom say it, because I see her a lot of the time be still sort of wrapped into the I have to be skinny, while I've myself tried to kind of let go of that, especially post-pandemic when it's been hard for everybody. But yeah, I was surprised even my mom, who was someone that I would say is like maybe brainwashed, I don't know if that's the best word for it, but like still in that mindset of like needing to be skinny, but she actually admitted that it's like, oh, I wish I would have grown up in a culture like today's where it's at least more accepted, or also that there's more like stretch pants. So that was interesting to hear like a Gen Xer even relate to the themes of this documentary and like the big impact that this marketing had on us, even if it wasn't just from Abercrombie themselves, because my mom was saying like it was every brand. I remember it was every brand that was like this. They're an interesting case, but they're definitely not alone. I don't think they were just the most extreme and the worst. Like blatant discrimination. Like I feel like other jobs they probably hire based on attractiveness, but at least didn't make it just white people or just young people. Like I don't know, but Abercrombie & Fitch had very strict dress codes, openly discriminating against black hairstyles. In the documentary they only mentioned dreadlocks, but I'm sure there was probably others. Being very hard on accessories. It was very regulated. Also, there was the racist graphic tees, which I was pretty surprised by. Like I don't even remember that many graphic tees. I remember all of the tees when I was shopping there were just the name, tacky embroidered stuff on the clothes. I don't remember like a graphic tee section. And I hated how they showed a lot of the creative employees, like the graphic designer and creative director. They did not seem apologetic enough for my liking in this doc. Like they were like, we're just trying to be witty. And I'm just like, that's what witty is to you? Just racist graphics? I mean, I can't say I'm surprised, but it was like icky. They were like, that was us. Hello? You're just admitting that? In the year of 2022. The racist t-shirts were bad, and apparently what happened with that is that they got called out by this guy. He had a blog called Angry Asian Man, and he sort of exposed Abercrombie and Fitch for these t-shirts, and eventually they got that line pulled. But also they talked about how they still had a racist Mexican shirt or a racist Native American shirts in stock, and the employees that created those shirts basically would get a fake hand slap and told not to do it. But the girl that was interviewed said it basically didn't matter, the calling out, and they pulled those exact t-shirts when they got called out, but they still had a lot of problematic graphics going out, and it was part of their brand and they were trying to be funny. I definitely got sidetracked earlier talking about this, but I wanted to mention how interesting it is that, like, how do I put this poetically? Like, the way the photography of Abercrombie and Fitch and the magazine was all led by mostly gay white men. It's interesting how this created the whole aesthetic and brand identity of this all-American white natural vibe that Abercrombie was going for. It was mostly gay men that artistically made it look desirable, and like they created this aesthetic. It was mostly the photographer named Bruce Weber, apparently, that his aesthetic was the aesthetic that transferred into, like, he was the sole photographer for Abercrombie and Fitch, and he seems to be a very problematic character because he has had a lot of sexual misconduct allegations as of now. He has settled most of them for undisclosed amounts of money, and it just seemed to be like a very habitual pattern. Some of the models talked about it in the documentary. But I did find it interesting hearing from some of the creative people that were involved in the creative direction and how it was sexually charged and it was homoerotic at times. And it makes sense now that I think about it. Like, the store was covered with pictures of man chests on every wall. Watching the doc, I was like, yeah, of course everyone in this leadership is gay. Like, this all is making more sense. Maybe that's why I don't see Abercrombie and Fitch as giving me like the most body image issues. Like, I think it's a collection of a lot of things. Maybe men would feel different. And even so, my boyfriend was watching this with me, and they mentioned something about abs, and they showed the guy's abs. And if the 2000s were about being skinny for girls, it was about having abs for the boys. It's interesting how, like, so much of the imagery at Abercrombie was men and shirtless men. And I feel like maybe men walking into it maybe felt more of an impact and felt more of like an inadequacy for like not looking like that. This kind of constant imagery of like these male physiques that are very unattainable for the average person. If you're a man, comment below if Abercrombie played a part in your body image issues, if you feel comfortable talking about that. They talk about in the documentary how Mike Jeffries, people speculated a lot of the time that he was gay, and then eventually he did have his partner working at Abercrombie and Fitch like way late, closer to when he was retiring. The irony of having, you know, gay men create this fantasy world of like photography and aesthetic and a brand. It's weird when the brand is kind of targeting conservative people that might be against gay rights in politics, but they're the clients. This is a whole iceberg that I am not equipped to chip away at in this video. So after Abercrombie was sued by a few, you know, minority former employees that were discriminated against, they had to agree to this consent decree, which I don't even know what consent decree means, but it seems to be like some court-ordered thing they have to do. But they mentioned that Abercrombie didn't do a lot with that consent decree, and also they weren't punished for like missing benchmarks on it, or they weren't checked up on. They did hire this like chief diversity officer position, and they had that former employee on the documentary, which was cool. They also had a diversity and inclusion manager named Toya. I really liked her in the documentary, who said it was very blatant how they would talk about like who was good looking and dissecting people's features in a very racist manner. I'm glad they touched on this in this movie. It's so common for the companies to just hire like one or two or just a tiny team of people and tell them, fix our racism, given no resources, no funding, no time, no attention from leadership, like given nothing to solve those issues. And you know, one person can't solve that, and it just sucks to be in that position where you're just the only minority in the room and you have to deal with constant microaggressions on top of actual blatant racism, talking about the brand. And I'm glad they kind of depicted it in this, just because it's something not talked about. Like, it feels like companies just are like, we're gonna fix it because we're gonna hire a diversity person, and it's just like, well, you also gotta do what they say, and you have to do a lot of work and really listen to that person if you actually mean it. that you're trying to change. It has to be like a very strong commitment. And all these brands are just trying to clean up their image to us, the consumer. And I don't think they're actually interested in being inclusionary or, you know, being better. They're just trying to sell a t-shirt. And that was kind of the ending line of the movie. Like, ultimately, this brand is trying to sell you a t-shirt, and they're gonna do whatever they can or want to do with it to make it happen. And in the 2000s, being exclusionary was seen as cool, and it's not cool now. So nowadays, Abercrombie and Fitch totally pivoted. It was actually in 2017. Mike Jeffries left in 2014. There were petitions to add plus sizes, and Mike Jeffries was fat phobic in his response, like blatantly like, we don't care about plus sizes, something about fat chicks. I don't remember the quote, but you know, he was saying in very plain terms, we're fat phobic, we're exclusionary, we're not for you. Done. Abercrombie and Fitch ended up meeting with the guy that made the petition, who was featured in the doc, and other professionals involved with helping bring awareness to eating disorders and other change.org people, something like that. Eventually, just Mike Jeffries stepped down, and that was the opportunity for the company to do a whole new direction. Fran Horowitz stepped in as CEO. She said that we're turning down the music, we're turning on the lights, we're becoming inclusionary. And when you look at their marketing nowadays, it is more typical of what you see from brands now, where you see a variety of sizes, ethnicities, like sexuality or gender expressions. But it's very hard to take it seriously when it's just like, this history has been so horrible. I personally would not want to shop there. But yeah, so nowadays Abercrombie & Fitch has a more typical inclusionary branding and a new CEO. Mike Jeffries is not involved. He gave himself a nice $27 million retirement package, according to the documentary. They did get in this huge lawsuit that was about an employee who got not hired because she had a headscarf. She had a hijab. And this lawsuit became huge because Abercrombie & Fitch doubled down and was like, no, because we don't allow hats. So Abercrombie & Fitch felt so strong in their side of the case that they let the case go all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in her favor, and the only one person that didn't was Clarence Thomas, which I don't actually know that much about him, but I do hear a lot of people on Twitter be mad at him. I'm really glad the Supreme Court ruled in her favor. I don't know, nowadays I have such low faith in like our political system in the US, like that I'm surprised when anything good happens. I think it's a key issue of religious freedom, which is something that, you know, this whole country is founded upon and all that. So it feels like the right thing happened, at least in that court case. But it was stupid how Abercrombie & Fitch felt so strongly about their exclusion that they let it go to the Supreme Court. Like, that's a big deal in the US. Earlier, after that first lawsuit with the group of minorities who got discriminated against, when they were trying to comply with this consent decree they signed, Abercrombie & Fitch changed the titles of the employees to models versus not models, some other title they made up, because they called the new employees models. That's where they could still do their exclusionary good-looking hiring for the front of the store, and they could get away with more hiring based on looks because it is modeling, which I never thought about how like the modeling industry doesn't fall under like regular discriminatory laws because it is a job based on your looks. So you can discriminate against looks. It's much more of a gray area, and I had never even thought about it as much as I watched America's Next Top Model. I feel like it never came up that like this is a unique field because you do have to get hired on looks, and normally that's illegal at other jobs. Abercrombie just in general had this trend of just doubling down when they were called out, and then also like fighting back all these people getting a bunch of publicity, making outwardly exclusionary comments by the CEO himself. It was all coming from the top down, and that's what was like the fascinating thing about the company, unlike maybe other retailers of the time. It was directions from the very top that were implementing these policies that were very blatant about focusing on looks and discrimination. I did ask my friend who in high school worked at Abercrombie & Fitch. I asked him for comment to give y'all an exclusive first-hand account. He actually didn't say much. He hasn't watched the documentary yet. He said the customers were for sure the worst, the most entitled people you've ever met. But he worked mostly in the back, and he was Latino, so but he hated the customer so much he wanted to stay in the back. He said a lot of people were trying to get to be in the front because there was less folding. He was down to fold all day. He said a girl from his store was picked to be on one of the bags. He was at the Corpus Christi location, I assume. And that there were also some guys at his store that were very ripped, and they were like models, and they would be shirtless at the front. And sometimes they were even sent to San Antonio, which is funny because that's where I was shopping. Maybe I saw his ripped co-workers there. And they would get paid $100 up front plus $14 an hour to stand at the front shirtless. I remember seeing the guys out there, I think like once or twice. Maybe like twice. It wasn't like every time. I'd be so nervous because it's like, I'm not trying to, like, I was a teen. Like, of course, I'm gonna be embarrassed, like a shirtless ass guy right there. So this video was supposed to be short and now it was long. I guess there was a lot to it. I think it is mostly because the subject is personal in a sense. It's something I experienced firsthand growing up and at some pivotal years. But I think there's a lot to blame for body image issues, and I think it's a lot of times by design. It's companies trying to sell you things like diet supplements, smaller clothes, beauty, like makeup and procedures. Like, the industry is all trying to make you feel like you're not good enough so that you buy stuff to feel better. That still to this day is part of retail. That's capitalism. Sometimes I do feel like today's culture is like the same thing, different font. It's not changed that much. It has in a lot of ways though. So it's hard for me to nail it down. Like, it is better, but they're still trying to sell you something. And I think at the end of the movie, that is part of the message, and that's something the director mentioned in her interview. She wasn't trying to say like, oh, they did the best thing at the end and they did the good thing and they're good now. She wanted to bring it back to like, they're still trying to sell you a t-shirt. It's just now inclusion is what sells you a t-shirt rather than being exclusionary, or just like the image of inclusion, I should say, not necessarily actual inclusion. So it's very interesting, a lot to think about, a lot more to think about than I expected even when I started this video. Let me know what you thought of White Hot, the rise and fall of Abercrombie & Fitch. I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Do you remember shopping there? Did you hate it? I find myself a little cringy for having shopped there. Like, I don't think it's a badge of honor. I think it's embarrassing at this point, but I was very young and impressionable, and I was just like, I don't even know what was influencing me, because I wouldn't even wear these clothes to school because I would wear a uniform. So it's like I would only wear these clothes out with my mom to the mall on weekends. So I didn't view it as some big statement, but I would love to hear whatever stories you have. If it wasn't Abercrombie & Fitch, what was your brand that impacted you growing up? I would love to hear about it. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed. I put out new videos twice a week about TV, pop culture, internet trends, and other miscellaneous things. You can follow me at Miscellaneous on Instagram or Twitter to find out about new videos, or just turn on the bell notification here on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!